Well, we've got all our parts. Let's put this thing together. Hey, it's Jason from Dad Talks Tech. In this channel, we like to do PC component overviews and reviews and educational videos and tutorials like this one. Today, we're going to be doing a PC build step by step, explaining to you the entire process, exactly what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. A couple gotchas along the way as well. For components today, we've got the Lian Li LandCool 2 case. For a motherboard, we're using the Aorus B550 Elite. For our processor, we've got an AMD Ryzen 5 3600. We're using G.skill's Trident Z Neos for our RAM, as well as a SN750 NVMe drive from Western Digital. For the graphics card, we've got an Asus TUF Gaming 5700 XT, and the power supply is 1650 watt Cooler Master. I think that'll do it. All right. So what I'm going to do is put all this together, like I said, give you some gotchas if there's anything that we should be looking out for in the future. All right, let's get to it. All right, we're all set to get going. The only tools we're going to need is a Phillips head screwdriver. I would recommend something that has a magnetic tip on it. It helps a lot to get the tiny screws into some of the tight places that we're going to be putting them in. So start with that, put that off to the side. Now, the first thing we want to do is get our motherboard ready. And so I've got my board box here, look in here, and inside you'll have the motherboard wrapped in anti-static bags. Set that aside for a second. I have two SATA cables for your hard drives and 2.5-inch SSDs. We're only gonna need one of these, so I'll keep that one off to the side. And Aorus is really nice that it comes with this little adapter thing that you plug into the motherboard, and then you plug in your front panel cables from your reset button, your power supply button, and if there's any LEDs on the front, they would all attach here as well. Also in the box will be a manual, a CD, DVD of drives, and usually some little swag, little badge there from Aorus. Thank you, Aorus. All right, so now that that is done, I'm just gonna spin this a little bit so I can get my motherboard on here. And I like to put my motherboard on top of the box just for a few reasons. One, there's things on the bottom here that are kind of scratchy and can scratch up my table, and I don't want to do that. Plus I want to keep some barrier for static reasons. Not really a big problem these days with the ESD protections that they have within these boards, but always nice to have. Now, first thing I want to do is get my processor ready to go and installed here, so I'm just going to grab that. Now, when you have your processor, you're going to make sure you're not touching the pins here, because if they bend, you're kind of out of luck. And so the first thing we're going to do, so just hold it by the corners and it's pretty easy to get around. First thing we're going to do is lift this little bar off of the way here, so you got to kind of push it down into the side and then lift it up until it's straight up. And then you're going to drop in your processor. Look at your processor. There's a little gold diamond or triangle. There's a little gold triangle on the corner. And what you're going to do is line that up with a triangle that's on the corner of your motherboard. And that's how you know it's in correctly. With Ryzen, you can kind of think of this bar here as the top of the CPU socket. And then if that's the top, you'll be able to read it from left to right like you would normally in a book. So with that, we're just going to set these down inside there, and you don't have to push it. In fact, you don't want to push it because you don't want to bend those pins. So just set it down gently until it seats and kind of wiggle it to make sure it's there. And then push this bar down until it locks. The next thing we're going to do is install our RAM. So I've got two of these G.skill Trident Z Neos, and they are going to go into RAM slots over here. Now what you want to do, take a look at your board, because it'll generally tell you with most boards these days, especially if you have 4 DIMM slots, with most motherboards these days, they incorporate dual channel memory. So what that means is that it works best if you have two of the slots filled with RAM. That'll give you the best performance. And on these boards, you'll notice that there is writing on here that tells you which slots you should populate first. So for this particular one, it's A2 and B2, it says first right here. So that would be the second and fourth slot on the board. So we're gonna take our RAM and we're gonna line it up with that slot, and you can see that there's a notch here within the RAM, and then there's a notch on the RAM slot, and you wanna make sure those are lined up. So if I'm looking at it here, we're way off. So there's really no way you can really mess this up. Just pay attention and make sure you're putting it in correctly. So this one I gotta flip over, and I'm just gonna slide it into that slot, push down until you hear a click on both sides. The big thing, you wanna make sure that these lock into place on the sides here, and do the same thing with the fourth slot. Now obviously if you have 4 sticks of RAM, populate the last 2 and you'd be good to go. It doesn't really matter the order you put them in as long as they're all installed correctly. The next thing we're gonna do is get our M.2 card in here, and all you have to do is take off this heatsink. There's a little screw right here. This is where the magnetic tip comes in really handy. And this just kind of slides out. And then depending on the size of your M.2 stick, it's dependent on where this little post needs to be. So mine is a 2280, so you can see there's an 80 written on the side of there. There's 60s and 42s, so they're shorter sticks, but for the most part these are going to be 2280s. And so you got to remove this screw that's in here first, and then we're just going to gently slide this into that slot there. Just kind of wiggle it in until it goes in, and you'll notice it's kind of hangs out there kind of weirdly, and that's why we got to screw it back down right where we took that out. You want to make sure you don't over tighten these two. And then we're just going to replace our heatsink. Pay attention, there might be a little piece of tape that's on here. That just helps with protection while it's in shipping. You can remove that. And then that slides right back in. Okay, so we're pretty much done with this part. The last thing to do is to put on the cooler. It is, depending on what kind of cooler you're using, it's a lot easier to do it while the motherboard is not inside the case, so that's why we're doing everything here. So we're going to do that first now. Now the cooler that came with the 3600 is this AMD Wraith cooler. You'll notice that these screw in to the mounting plates on the motherboard. And so some will use clips that go on these little brackets here, but we can't use these, but we do need these slots where it's screwed into. So we're gonna remove that. So all we need to do is remove these screws, all 4 of them. And you might want to hold on to the bracket just in case you ever want to resell the board or change coolers and they need that bracket. Generally speaking, whatever cooler you buy is going to come with all the brackets needed, but better safe than sorry. When you first get this cooler as well, it generally has thermal paste already applied right here. I have used mine already, so it's been wiped off. So we're gonna have to apply thermal paste on our own. Thermal paste helps conduct heat from the CPU out into these fins, and then the fan cools them off. Okay, so put that aside for just now. Get our thermal paste. And the thermal paste I'm using is the Arctic MX4. Pick up whatever you need. These are fairly cheap, about $10 a tube, but they get multiple uses out of them. What we're gonna do is just put a little, about pea size, right in the middle of your CPU. And then when you put the fan on, you got to kind of pay attention to things. So you can tell that this has got to go, because of the orientation of the screws, it's got to go kind of this way or this way. But you'll notice that this AMD is kind of sticking out and might interfere with my RAM sticks over here, should I add more in the future. So I want to put it this way. Okay, so I'm just going to gently set this down so that the screws line up with the holes. And try not to move it around too much because that thermal paste will get all over the place. It's kind of gross. And so we'll line it up with the screws. Grab our screwdriver. You're just going to tighten these down. Probably a good idea just to do a few turns on each one and not crank down on them until you get all of them kind of seated. can't really over tighten these because they'll stop as soon as you hit where it's gonna go. And then we got to plug in the fan. You look here, you got a 4-pin fan header, and so you want to look for the 4-pin that's on here, the one that says CPU fan written on there. So for this one, it's this white one up here. So I'm just going to plug that in, and the tops will have 2 little fins, or whatever you want to call them, that stick out a little bit, and so those go on the side of the tab that's sticking up, so you can't really put this in incorrectly either. That just slides in, and then we're going to hide our cables just for some management purposes here. That's about as good as I can get it from here, I guess. And there we go. Our motherboard is pretty much installed and ready to put into the case. So we'll get to that. All right, I've got my case opened up. I've already put it on its side or on its back, however you want to see it, because it's a lot easier to do it this way than trying to get it while it's standing up. And so I'm gonna give you a couple of things to think about here. When you're looking inside your case, one, I'm gonna leave the fans in because this configuration, I think it's okay to put them in there and it's not a big deal, they're not in the way. But if you want to remove that, there are 4 screws on the back for this fan, 4 on the top for this fan to remove if you want. And that's all you need to do for that, and those come straight out. When you're looking at your case, you want to make sure that your standoffs are installed in the correct spot. Your case should come with them. If it's not installed already, they're probably in a bag that's in with a bunch of accessories. Cases generally come with the standoffs, some sort of tool to remove and put them in, and then the screws to mount the motherboard to the case itself that you would screw into these standoffs. So you should have pretty much everything you need within the case or the motherboard itself. All right, so first things first, I'm gonna get these cables out of the way because those definitely will be a problem later. I'll just tuck that one in there. Okay, so I'm gonna take my motherboard, and you'll notice that it has this I/O shield kind of on here. It makes it look pretty on the outside. Covers up the back side of this motherboard. Now on the newer generations, this is already included, it's already attached, you don't have to worry about putting it in correctly. And some of the older generations, the B450s and 570s, or I'm sorry, 470s and such, that would come separately. And so if that's the case, there's a slot on the bottom here in the back right here that you would install that plate first before you put the motherboard in. Okay, so we're gonna take our motherboard, and feel free to hold it by the cooler because it's on there pretty well. And you're just gonna line that up with the hole in the back that I just showed you and make sure that it's gonna hit these standoffs on where all the screw holes are. There should be 9 of them on an ATX board, about every corner and a couple in the middle. The one in the middle is raised up a little bit, and so it kind of locks itself into place, and that's when you know you've got it in the right spot. So you are good to go here. We're just going to attach those. Okay, so we're going to take our motherboard screws. They're kind of small and a little flat on the top, and we're going to put those right on each of these holes here. And this is where the magnetic tipped screwdriver comes in really handy, because sometimes it's tough to get those in there. Okay, now something I'm doing that's a little optional is that my graphics card is a little longer and heavier than your average graphics card. And so I'm gonna put this bracket on here to kind of help hold it up. Kind of take some weight off of the PCI slots, because it can, if it's too heavy and sags, it can kind of damage the port over time. And so yeah, this is called an anti-sag bracket. I wonder if they make anti-sag brackets for people. Anyway, the way that we attach this is we are going to take these standoffs, this particular model anyway, take these standoffs and we're going to replace that with where we would put these 2 screws. So I'm just gonna screw those in here. This particular one came with this little tool to help screw those in, since it's not a normal screw. You don't want to over tighten those either. And then we take the normal motherboard screws and attach them to this bracket to those standoffs. All right, now we got our last one. I realized how shaky I was until I started putting this thing together. All right, so we got that prepared. Now, I've got my fan wire kind of snaking around here, and it's gonna be a lot easier to attach if I do it now versus standing up, so I'm gonna do that. And what you need to do is take your 3-pin header on these fans. I don't know if you can see that, there we go. So we've got 3 pins on there, but you'll notice that if you're looking for your system fan, this one's gonna go back here. There's another one down here. It says sys fan 1, 2, 3. Those have 4 pins on them. It's not a mistake. You just gotta pay attention to the little tab that's on the top, and the tab is gonna slide between here. So you're only gonna use 3 of the 4 pins. And that just slides right in like that. And once we get to the back side, we'll pull some slack through. It's about as good as we're gonna get from here. Gotta turn around and put some stuff on the back side. Rocking. All right, so now that we got the front together, at least the insides, the one thing I do want to do before we turn this thing around is plug in this fan that we didn't do. And you can see this is kind of long slack here, and the pin is right here. So I'm going to go ahead and plug it in first, and then I'll do some cable management. There we go. I'm going to wrap this around here, kind of tuck it back there. I'd rather have it sticking up in the top than back here. So there we go. And that should just about do it. All right, so now we got everything else in the front already attached. Spin this puppy around and see what we need to do back there. So you can see for this particular case, I already took off the glass shroud that's on here, or the glass cover. We open up this bottom part, and this particular one has covers all over it for cable management and kind of hide all the mess that you make, so we'll gotta take those off. So do that. These are just thumb screws up here. Cases may vary. So what I'm gonna do is unattach these first and get this mess kind of moved around a bit. Now what I want to do is kind of feed these through the case close to where they are going to be plugged into the motherboard, so that all the cables are going to hide back here versus being stuck up there whenever possible. So this is our front panel cable. That's going to go roughly right there. So our USB 3 cable, again, that's on this particular board. It's down here. Some of them are up here, so just pay attention to where you're putting your stuff. We've got the HD audio. That's also going to be way up there. This is a 3-pin 5-volt RGB for the front cover of this case. That header is down here as well, so we're going to put that there. We've got our SATA power for our RGB in the front cover. This is going to stay back here because it's just going to plug into my power supply. And then we've got another fan header for the fan that's up here in the front, and that's going to go back there as well. And I think I'm going to go ahead and spin this around and plug those in just to keep them more or less out of the way. So let's do that. Got our HD audio, and you'll notice that there's a pin down here that says audio inside of it. So we're going to plug it in right there. And again, there's only one way to plug this in, so you just got to pay attention to how you're putting it in. Slide it in there. So this is the USB cable. kind of a flat cable. And that's gonna plug right in here to the USB 3.2 port. Sometimes they're up here next to the motherboard power, but for this one it's down here, so I'm just gonna plug that in and shove in the extras. Oh, got another fan. System fans right here. Again, might be different on your motherboard. And we've got the RGB. For the 3-pin RGB, you just want to make sure you're finding one that says LED. On this board, it says DLED as in digital LED. Might say ARGB as in addressable RGB. That's only for the addressable RGBs. If it's just a normal 4-pin LED, there's also one of those right next to it. But this one's right here, so I'm going to plug it in. There, that one's in. The only thing I have left up here is the front panel switches. So like the reset button, the power button, and the LEDs. Like I said, my Aorus board comes with this little adapter here. Otherwise you have to plug in each of these individual ones individually into here, and it's kind of a pain sometimes. But Aorus made it kind of nice. I think a lot of motherboard vendors are starting to adopt this. Hopefully it'll be sooner rather than later. But you're just gonna line up where it says, like this one is for the power switch, and there's a plus and minus. So I'm gonna find my power right here and line up the plus and minus. Slide that in there. I've got a power LED for the LED light. Again, plus and minus. Again, it's labeled on this thing. It's also labeled on your motherboard if you don't get this adapter. If it's not on your motherboard, check your motherboard's instruction manual. And then we've got the reset switch right here, plus and minus. We're just gonna plug that in there. It only goes in one way. We are all set. I think we're gonna put the graphics card in now. That way we have everything all set in the front before we start feeding cables through. And like I said, this one's kind of beefy, so it's pretty long. And the big thing you have to do first, so you have to remove the second and third cover back here on the back plate. So those are just screwed in, pretty easy. Don't lose the screws, you're gonna need them again. And I like to keep these back plates with my motherboard box just in case. All right, we're gonna take this, we're gonna line it up with the gray slot right here. You wanna push this little lock over to the side, just like your RAM. And then we're gonna slide that in to that port, matching up the connections, push until it clicks. There you go. So now we're in. Just want to replace the screws. Again, you don't want to over tighten these either, so you can strip those. So there we go. We've got all our components in. On the front side anyway. Still got to do the power supply. And that's what's next. So we're going to spin this guy around again. Open up our bottom. Now on this side, I want to put the power supply through here, but we've got 4 mounting screws on the back here. So we're going to take our power supply. Remember, we've got the modular one, so there's no cables already running out there, so I got to attach those first. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to need a 24 pin for my motherboard, PCIe for my graphics card, and another PCIe for the CPU power. And I'm also going to need a SATA one for the RGB in the front and for my hard drive. So grab the cable. Okay, I've got my 24 pin, and you'll notice on this one, it's got kind of a 24 and 8, 24 and 10 on one side, and the 24 on the other side. So you want the kind of one that's split on this particular power supply. It could be different on yours. To go into that one, and that just pops in there until it clicks. Grab my PCIe, plug that one in here. That one's going to go to the graphics card. Got another PCIe for my CPU. Again, that plugs in right there. And the last cable is a cable for the SATA. On mine, I've got 4 different ports. It doesn't really matter which one you choose. Just choose one that works best for you. I'm going to try and keep it toward the middle, I think. Okay, so that's all 4 the cables that I need. If you need more SATA, you can do that. If you need more PSU, if you need more PCIe power, obviously you can add those in, but this is all I need for mine. So I'm gonna move this over so you guys can see a little bit better. And I just have to kind of snake all this in there. And I want the fan to be down on this particular model because it's going to draw air in and then push it out the back. And I've got a filter on the bottom of this case that kind of keeps the dust out while it's drawing that air in. So there we go. I grab the screws that came with the case. And so I'm going to turn this around so I can mount this. Again, you just line those up. All right, now the power supply's installed, we're gonna maneuver some of these cables around. So first I've got the CPU power. You can see that it says CPU on the side. It's usually a 4-pin, it might be an 8-pin depending on your motherboard. We're just gonna slide this in here. So that's gonna go that way. Just let that hang for now. This is my PCIe cable for the GPU. So we'll slide that in through the bottom on this one because I want it to kind of slide around there. And then I've got my 24-pin, which is going to plug in the motherboard right about here. So I just got to slide that in there for now. And then the SATA one, I want to stay back here because that's going to plug into the hard drive. For this one, comes out right here, and for the RGB on the front, which is right here. So I can go ahead and plug that in. And what you'll do is just, the plug is kind of an L shape, so you just have to make sure you're lining up the L's. Can't really install them incorrectly. So we got that. Keep that hanging out until we put the hard drive in. And that is about that so far. So let's spin her around. All right, so I'm gonna plug in these cables. I'm gonna start with my 24-pin for the motherboard. You'll notice that there's a clip on one side and there's a little lip on there on the port. So you can only, again, plug it in one way. So that's pretty simple. Plug that in and just push it in until you hear it click. Plug in my GPU. And this is a 6+2 cable. You can kind of see that it's 6 and then there's a 2 that can come off of it. So for this particular graphics card, I've got a 8-port and a 6-port for my power supply. So I'm gonna use both of them on one of them. And then for my 6-pin, I'm just gonna kind of hide that to the side because you don't need to plug all of them in if it doesn't require it. So plug that in until it clicks. Hide that. Push back my excess. Good to go there. And the last one is the CPU power up here in the corner, and that's the most difficult one to get to. I like to give myself a lot of slack and then pull it through. And you gotta kind of maneuver sometimes. It's a bit of pain. Till it pops. There we go. Pushing back the excess. And there we have all of our power. The one thing I do want to add in here, because we are going to add that hard drive, is my SATA data port cable. For this one, it's going to plug into these SATA ports right here. So I'm going to slide that through, because again, we'll plug it in the back. And that's going to plug right there again. Only goes in one way, clicks when it's done. Now we're going to put in our hard drive, and for this one, it's got a little sled on here. It's kind of nice. This just pops out, you slide it out. Sits in so that your cables are in the back because we're going to attach everything in the back. And then these just screw in on the sides here with the screws that came with your case. Okay, now we're just going to slide that back in there until it locks. We are good to go. Plug in those last bits. So for the hard drive, I got a plug down here. This is my data cable. Plug in there. Keep that up here. And power here. Okay, so that's about it. That's all we have to really put together. I'm going to do some quick cable management and then we'll start it up. Right, I've got it all put together. Considered kind of bad luck to put on the glass before you make sure it all works. So I'm gonna plug it in and we'll see if this thing lights up. We turned on our power supply. We've got some lights here on the GPU and on the motherboard that you can kind of see to make sure that it's getting power for one. And then, so we're good there. We've also got some power on the RAM. Let's turn it on. Boom. There we go. You hear it boot up a couple times, and it's pretty normal, so don't freak out if it starts to cycle like that. It's what happens on the first boot, and it's still trying to find that Windows key, which we haven't done yet, which we're gonna do on the next one. So if you want to get notified when that video comes available, like and subscribe, and you'll get notified when it's coming in. But that'll be our next video, is to put it on the Windows OS and any drivers or anything like that we need to do. Last thing we need to do on this, put the cover on. It's all good. See you next time.